So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm still waiting for a signal when the live stream starts, but okay, we can go. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Commissioner Hoekstra today. He will introduce to us the 2040 targets proposed by the Commission, hopefully explaining a bit the why and how of the targets have been set the way they have been set. Commissioner Hoekstra has inherited the preparations on this rather important file from his predecessor on relatively short notice, but as a former finance and foreign minister of the Netherlands, he certainly knows rather well to handle politically sensitive files as this one. Now, the agenda for today, to make it quick, is first there will be an introduction by the commissioner of about 15 minutes or so. Then I would like to dive into 2-3 questions a bit more deeply with him for maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for another 15-20 minutes of discussion, question and answer with you. For that, the tool that we will be using is Slido, so you can put your questions on slido and under hashtag climate2040, and they will pop up on my tablet, and then I can read them out and ask the questions. So please don't write long comments, but rather punchy questions, and maybe also the colleagues from the Commission can help to already answer some of the questions on Slido here. It's a recorded event. There are journalists here, so that's the rules of the game. I think for most of us, the target value that has been set does not come as a surprise. It has been relatively clear that this is the range that will be proposed by the Commission, but the big question is how it is being justified. So for me, the big challenge of this 2040 targets document is to get really broad backing for these transformative targets that we have to go for 2040. And this broad backing will be crucial to reduce cost, because it reduces uncertainty. If we don't get broad backing, there will always be the risk that the consensus will fall apart and nobody will invest. Therefore, hence, we need a very good impact assessment. We need a good narrative and justification in order to move ahead. This requires 3 things, in my view: an engaged public discussion, such as the one that we are hopefully having today, sensible targets, we can discuss that today, and convincing narratives, and that's then the test of time. And here, in my view, it's good to have a really beefy impact assessment. We haven't had many impact assessments on energy and climate policy in the last 2-3 years, so it's very good to have one into which we can chew and discuss, because that helps us to have a fact-based discussion. My take would be that the Commission choose to have a rather broad bucket of narratives, so ranging from health to security, rather than having one single kind of all-encompassing narrative, but we can discuss that, which makes it maybe easier to defend because you have an argument all the time, but it also is a bit difficult to discuss, so which is making it a bit hard today to compress it all into 45-50 minutes. So yeah, first, my question to you would be, can you maybe explain to us a bit more, introduce the crucial elements as you see them in the proposal that the Commission has made?
Thank you, and Chair, thanks first of all for having me. And ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, very good to see you, and thanks very much for being here and having this very open conversation. And Chair, I hope you don't hold it against me, but I'm immediately going to make a mess of your agenda setting because actually I think you proposed me talking for 15 minutes and then we would dive into the Q&A. But in my experience, we're going to be even more effective towards the audience if I'm not going to fall into the trap that politicians always fall into or deliberately step into, which is, talking for 17 minutes within an hour and then no time for questions. So I'm going to try to be a bit succinct, and then I'm sure you have a long list of things you would want to embark on, and otherwise I'm sure the audience would want to do that. Having said that, a couple of remarks to kick it off. First, to your question, why are we setting that target? And there are a couple of things I wanted to highlight. First, as everyone knows, there is a very clear target that the whole world has embraced for 2050. which is net zero. Within the European Union, in the last couple of years, we've also come to agree on a target of 55% for 2030. And we are likely to exceed, to be even better than that specific target. We now assess that we will be at 57. But by the way, we're not going to change this because predictability for our society and for our businesses is of tremendous importance. But having a target of 2030, having a target of 2050, actually makes it logical to also articulate what does need to happen in between. So that is a reason that the Commission has already, I think, in close dialogue with Parliament, said years before that we should at some point in time come up with a target for 2040. And I think it was literally in his legislation or in the package that was agreed on earlier that within half a year after the COP, after the global stocktake, we would need to come up with a proposal. So that is, I think, the basic logic why we need to come up with a target. Then the next question is, what is all the stuff that you need to take into account to come up with a target that is ambitious, that is doable, that is reasonable, and that takes all the various aspects of this difficult equation into account? One clearly is the need for further climate action. And the one thing that strikes me, and I'm sure we will be talking about a bit more about that, is that when I talk to citizens in all the various member states, it is crystal clear to them that climate change is a clear and present danger, because they see the flooding, they see the droughts, sometimes paradoxically almost at the same time, and they see how weather is changing. And not only for our continent, but for the world at large, it is tremendously important that we continue with climate action. So that is one imperative to be ambitious for 2040. The second one, and interestingly, that is very often mentioned by businesses, small and large, please give us predictability. Be clear about where you want to go, and then don't do what politicians do too often, change course as you go along. Try to be clear about where you would want to be in 2040. So I think that is also something that we have to take into account. Then third, and that is, and you are indeed rightly referring to, there is always a bucket of reasons. Third, and it might not have gotten the attention that it deserves, in order to, well, when we become climate neutral, that has a huge positive effect in terms of our security and our energy supply. It's almost a memory that is behind the horizon, but it was only 1.5, 2 years ago that we decided to get rid of Russian gas and oil, certainly gas, and that came with significant consequences. Getting closer to net zero more quickly basically makes us more independent. And I think that is a tremendously important thing from a geopolitical angle. And then the last thing, and I will not be entirely complete, but the last thing that is, of course, of tremendous importance here to take into account is how we bridge, how we marry climate ambition with what I always call standing on that other leg. Standing on the leg of competitiveness, standing on the leg of a just transition. Because the same citizens and the same companies I was just referring to and with whom I've had a lot of contact are saying, yes, we do know that climate action is something we need to continue. And yet we are also worried about the impact it might be having on our own lives, on the way we can do business, on whether we can pay the bills, on what it might mean for the type of work me and my family might be having in the future. So in my view, there is no alternative for the European Union to continue with climate ambition on the one hand and marry that, bridge that with focus on competitiveness and on a just transition. It is not either or. We should never step into the narrative of one at the expense of the other. It is a dual purpose we truly need to live up to. So that is what we're trying to do. And given all that I have said, you can hopefully understand that there is a clear logic to go for 90%, and yet also be very clear about the prerequisites that are part of the communication. because this is not something we can do alone. It is not something we can do in isolation, and it comes with, you know, meeting very clear demands that are there in all of our societies. So that is in a nutshell. Of course, there's a lot more to be said about it. Maybe one last thing before I give the floor back to you, Chair, and that is the trajectory. This is, and you know this much better than I do, but this is in Commission speak, a communication. It's a form that is relatively new to me, but what it does mean is that we now communicate, but we leave it up to the next Commission to basically put things into motion, get concrete, articulate what that means in potential sub-goals, how the prerequisites are exactly shaped. And I think that is actually the right thing to do, because we do give forward guidance. We show what the direction. Please come in. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Everyone is looking at you, but please feel free to sit down. No worries at all. Happens to me all the time. And I think that is fair, because there will be a new mandate with a new Commission and a new Parliament, and so we do give forward guidance. We do give the direction of travel, but how to exactly shape this is then up to the next Commission.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the kind of leaving us also more time for question and discussion. I think it's a good approach. And your last statement was quite important. So we are not going to discuss instruments today. So if you put your questions on which ETS linear reduction factor, that's not for today. For today is the question on are these good targets and are they well justified? I would like to kick off maybe with one of the narratives which you kind of mentioned as core one about kind of preventing climate change. To prevent climate change, of course, Europe with its 7-8% of global emission, it's not going to strike it on its own. And there needs to be a certain theory behind why European action is crucial to catalyze global action. And I've seen maybe a bit too little, in my view, on that in the impact assessment, how essentially the link between what Europe is doing and what the rest of the world is learning from that is following or not following. And maybe a sub-element to that is in its report last year, the Scientific Advisory Board has come up with the notion of fairness, which they made extremely strongly there, which I also didn't see too much referred to in the impact assessment and into the communication. Can you maybe indicate on why that was?
So first on the numbers, and you're absolutely right. One of the things many people might not know about from the top of their heads is that actually, if you look at global emissions, roughly 7% comes from the European Union. That means that 93%, and that is a huge number, 93% of global emissions are being pumped into the air in all the other continents combined. And that tells me two things. One is that, you know, given the position of affluence, given the knowledge that we have, given the desire in our societies to be ambitious, and given the fact that we still are responsible for 7%, which is a minority, but still a significant figure, it does make sense to continue with climate leadership. And again, in the balance with competitiveness and just transition. Having said that, if we only solve this at our own continent, and we will drive down the 7% to zero, but the other 93% go down too slowly, we still do have a huge problem in the European Union and, of course, everywhere else. Because one of the things that is so important to understand is that climate change is absolutely indiscriminate. It happens all over the world. And I was struck when I was traveling before the COP. In Brazil, they have their long list of examples. In Chile, the exact same thing. When I was in Kenya with President Ruto, exact same thing. China, exactly the same. It happens everywhere, and the manifestations are sometimes slightly different, but people are experiencing this everywhere. So we need to solve not only the 7%, but also the 93%. And you might have noticed, and maybe I should have articulated that even more strongly, but you might have noticed that when I was in the plenary in the European Parliament, I have therefore deliberately said that we will make more work of diplomacy, and particularly with a focus on carbon markets. Because if you look at the European Union, one of the things we did extremely well was embark on the ETS. I can easily say that I was never part of the design, but this truly is the crown jewel and the working horse of the whole system that we've built. It is very, very smart in its design, and it has been tremendously effective. Now, this is the European way to do it. Sometimes people who consider to embark on carbon markets have a slightly different approach. Sometimes pricing is involved. Sometimes they want to structure it in a different way. But what is interesting to me is that in all the international conversations I've had, I have sensed that carbon markets is, as the saying goes, an idea for which the time has come. And in Chile, they are on the verge of implementing legislation. In Brazil, they were, I think, putting legislation we're putting it through the lower house. China already has at least a sort of a carbon market. Quebec has it, California has it, and I am certain that this trend will continue. We will see more carbon markets, and eventually we also need to connect those carbon markets with, whether that is a clearinghouse or whatever you want to call it. This is truly the way of the future. And one of the things the European Union could and should do is touch the 93% and then particularly make the world even more enthusiastic about carbon markets, simply because it is so impactful. Simply because it is so impactful. And that is why I mentioned in the plenary, hopefully making up a bit for what you missed in the communication, that we will embark on a significant effort to help out countries in the world that do have appetite for something that either looks like the ETS or might be slightly different in its design. And I can imagine this raises many questions, but I think this should also be at the very heart of our climate effort in the next 5 years. Again, it is up to the next Commission, but if I were to write what should be at the core of climate action, it is, developing 2040, and it is international climate diplomacy with a huge focus on carbon markets. You also had a second question, or do you already want to move on?
Maybe a yes/no question on the previous one. Does that imply that you're also going to push more on international carbon trading?
That eventually, I'm sure that will happen. And the interesting thing is that there is a lot of fuss about CBAM, and sometimes that is deliberately being created to put Europe on the defensive. However, the good news is that you also see that there is a significant anticipation effect, and countries are wondering what it actually means for them, and how they can adjust. And that was already the case before CBAM was being implemented. So I think the combination of the ETS, now also having CBAM, and having a number of countries embarking on this endeavor themselves, I think that combination is going to be extremely powerful in the next 10, 15 years.
And the second question on fairness not being that present in the impact assessment, while it was strongly in the scientific advisory board's report.
Yeah. So maybe a couple of words also on the report, and let me start by saying that what is so important to me and for the European Union is that in a case like this. We need to be very explicit that this is not something we do. Climate action is not something we do because I say so, or because the Commission says so, or because politicians feel this is ideologically the right thing to do. No, we're doing it because the best scientists of the Union and beyond are saying that the planet basically has only red lines left. That is the reality we're facing. Would we have embarked on climate action as a global community 20, 30, 40 years earlier, we might have had a different path in the transition. But the reality is that the window of opportunity is basically closing. The planet is heating up more quickly, and that is a huge problem wherever people live. So I do want to leave you with at least my conviction that we should be that serious about listening to the scientific community and their advice. That is also why we have embraced the 90%. And by the way, that is also clear from the communication or from the advice that they've given us. We need to make sure that we also pay attention to the prerequisites, and we do need to take into account the concerns. Now, on fairness, and indeed there are a couple of notions on this in the report. What they do acknowledge is actually that people might have different perspectives on what fairness actually means. And some might argue that fairness is something where you need to look back. Others might argue that fairness means that those with more affluence today have a responsibility to carry the whole world forward. Again, others take a different approach, and I think that is all fine, but the thing I feel most comfortable with, I think is most effective going forward, and also the thing where we can easiest land on and in a global community is a joint responsibility, where clearly those with the means, like ourselves, have a different responsibility than those which are in a completely different state of their development.
I think we have like 10 minutes for these bilateral left. So maybe briefly, in the impact assessment, which I encourage everybody to have a look into, even so reading these 600 pages is quite a challenge.
I had to spell it for the hearing, so yes, I can advise it to all of you.
You line out essentially a few scenarios, and then there are, of course, implicit in those scenarios certain sectoral preferences, sectoral trajectories about some sectors going down faster and earlier than others, namely on the electricity and heat sector going rather early on, agriculture having a bit more space, also reflecting some of the questions we got via Slido. Is that in any way indicative of what you think the next Commission will have in mind when setting out policies? And also, have you looked into what it would mean on a member state level already? And is there some thinking about whether that can be translated into somewhat fair sharing between member states?
Look, what the President has said and what I've said last week is that it is of tremendous importance to, on the one hand, be clear about the direction of travel and the goal. And at the same time, if you embark on a dialogue with your society, with your business community, with the farmers, with SMEs, with large corporations, regardless of their industries, and with citizens from all walks of life, if you want to do that in the right way, then it doesn't make sense to already preclude where you want to land. And this to me is also about, the essence of democracy. It is being clear about where you do want to go, but you do need to create buy-in. So what I will not do, also not today, is loosely philosophize about what sector might be more on the forefront of this or more on the backside of the equation or how to do it. Not only because that easily creates misunderstandings, but also because I do want to do justice to the dialogue we seek to embark on.
Okay, so the numbers in the impact assessment on the sectoral shifts are not yet the kind of the basis for discussion, but the discussion is coming later.
We will have the discussion. I think that is fair, and of course, everyone has seen not only the various pieces that have been made by the scientific advisory board, but also all the material that is in the official communication. But I do, in this phase, I think it is important that everyone is able to inform him or herself on what is in there. And then, of course, what is, as always in politics, it is you can agree on the why and on the what, but it is typically most difficult to agree on the how. And that is also the phase where we now land.
When having a look into the communication and the impact assessment, one of the elements that I value highly when thinking about decarbonization, which is kind of the implied innovation in the country, and as a consequence, increased competitiveness. So, I mean, if we would have done on transport sector decarbonization, we might have earlier, we might have been on a better stage in terms of electric vehicles by now. And we are now heading for essentially the second phase of decarbonization with 100% renewable system, which will look very, very different, which will have different technologies feeding into it. We will have to decarbonize agriculture. We will have to do a CCUS. We will do a circular economy. So there is a lot of business opportunities still at grabs here. Have you looked into that more deeply to see essentially where maybe also on a regional level we can make more out of these opportunities of decarbonization?
Maybe a couple of thoughts on this one. And the first one is, you're absolutely right. Innovation will be at the very heart of this transition. And I can assure you it will continue to amaze us. There are all sorts of reasons to be pessimistic about many of the figures that we have recently seen on what is happening in terms of climate change. And indeed, I'm certain it will get worse before it gets better. But the one positive note that is clearly also there is that technology and innovation in terms of its adaptation and in terms of its impact always surprises us and outperforms our wildest expectations. And I'll give you a couple of examples that you also might recognize from back home. Our kids are 14, 13, 10 and 8 years old. And they once run into one of these phones that my parents used to have. You know, these gray things. They were standing in the corner of the living room, and they didn't recognize it because for them a phone is this. And a phone is not just for calling, a phone is basically for managing your life, at least for them. And it is for games, and it is for apps, and it is for what have you. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the adaptation curve of the phone, it took a while until we stopped laughing at those people with these huge phones in their hands, you know, trying to be impressive and calling other people with bad reception. But then within a very short period of time, adaptation was tremendous. And I don't know the exact statistics, but I'm pretty certain that within the European Union, you by now have more phones than individuals. If you look at solar panels, you see something similar. A very interesting statistic is that if you look at what the UN projected in 2014 in terms of the prices of solar cells, their best, so most optimistic, cheapest projection for 2040 was something we managed to reach in, I believe, 2021. That is huge. That is huge in terms of how many years we've gained in terms of arriving at a sort of certain price point and what it actually implies for the opportunity that is there. And of course, the economies of scale and the price going down is a trajectory that will only continue. And yes, of course, you know, you get new challenges in return because we need to invest more into the grid. And that is something that we might not have anticipated to this extent 10 years ago. But I'm convinced that in each of these sectors, you know, there's no panacea. Innovation is not the only thing that is going to do the whole trick, but it will manage to surprise us positively. And then the last thing, and that was on your question, you know, where is that going to be? Is that going to be in a specific country or in a specific sector? I have never been a portfolio manager or an investor, but I did work a lot with them in previous walks of life. And I guess they will tell you that it is hard to predict which out of 5, 6, 7 innovations will be the eventual winner. What you would need to do as someone who believes in innovation is expose yourself to a set of options. And you know that would include batteries, that would include solar panels, it would include wind. I mean, it's all sorts of things that should be part of the equation. And then you might be surprised what the actual winners are and what the laggards will be eventually, and also where they will be in the European Union. But what is extremely important, that we as Europeans need to make sure we have a vast stake in this part of the future. We continue to invest much more in terms of innovation, because in any case this will be a winner not only for climate action, but also for productivity and for wealth.
Thank you. My last follow-up question on that would be essentially a lot of the papers about front versus backloading. Does it make sense to do the investments early on or later? Now you mentioned kind of the value of innovation in the process and bringing down the cost. Would that not call for kind of going a bit slower and hope that the innovation pays off over time and a bit later?
I don't think that will be the advice you would be getting from entrepreneurs or people who have been investing in innovation. Yes, occasionally you might be better off by waiting and then leapfrogging people who have started to embark on something early on. But typically, those who are at the forefront continue one way or another to stay at the forefront. And the other thing is, this will be the future. It will be there, and we've seen it in the domain of solar panels. Again, I'm very positive about it, but we used to be almost leading in it a couple of years ago. Now this is mainly a Chinese thing, and we are getting redder while we're getting greener. We're getting more dependent on China in our quest to become greener, which is problematic, I would say. And that tells us that it should not be us who should or could afford to play wait and see. No, we should be on the forefront of this. Our businesses like to be at the forefront of this, and I'm absolutely convinced that there is a huge business opportunity here as well, and that will improve the lives of many of our citizens through their jobs, to second-order effects, and by greening our continent.
Okay, which might essentially bring us back to the 7 versus 93%. So if we develop the market, then we have a market of 93% left that we can roll out our technology later on. Maybe we now come to the audience. I think there should be also a microphone in the. You steal my microphone. Okay, then
you need to hand in your microphone. And
yes.
okay.
So there's somebody in the front row. I think we take 3 questions. Breathe very quickly and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I'm Luca Jaillet, past President of the European Economic and Social Committee. I was very much impressed by what you said, and I thank you for your determination, for the strong line, even improving the determination of Europe of keeping the line for the issue, the double issue that is the predictability of Europe, and on the other side, the will to be in the front runner of the innovation of tomorrow, not knowing today what will be the final result. This morning I was in the Interparliamentary Assembly about the economic governance and the reform. I was quite shocked by listening to Ingeborg Grasse, the past chair of the Commission of Control of Budget in the Parliament, now chair of the Budget Committee in the Bundestag. She said, I try to repeat textually, but she was in German, that we have to take stock of the fact that the excessive weight of the climate law is killing the German history, the milking cow of European economy. So I just raised my head. So how do you think that we can face these growing critics, not only in the streets, not only by some, but even by politicians, that as she is and many others are using, also in my country, Italy, there is a rising mood in some political party on this issue. I am on your line, but what is your answer to this challenge? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Panos Gredis, representative European Public Law Organization. You mentioned, thank you very much for the presentation. You mentioned one side panels in China independence. And my question is that our friends Americans under the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, put huge amount of budget for environmental reasons. And do we need also in the European Union some increasing in terms of economic governance changes for targeting the goal 2040 on this issue? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'm Aurélie Beauvais, the Managing Director of Euroheat and Power, that's the District Heating and Cooling Association. And my question to you will be about the role of heating and cooling decarbonization in the 2040 framework. From our perspective, that's a big elephant in the room, which is missing in the current context. You acknowledge that buildings are 42% of the consumption, energy consumption, 35% of energy-related emissions, and 80% of the total consumption is from heating and cooling. And we do find a lot of elements about renewable electricity sources, yes, which are important, but you have about 2,000 terawatt-hour per year of resources which are available today in Europe with renewable heat sources and excess heat recovery sources. That's more than the total forecasted heat demand. And district heating and cooling networks are an essential technology to tap into that. They supply 67 million consumers today. So the question is, why isn't it in the 2040 framework?
Well, thank you. It's going to be a hell of an afternoon. Let me. I'll do them in the order the questions were asked. And let me start with the debate, sir, you were referring to in Germany, but also in other countries. And the thing we simply have to acknowledge is that the same people, good-willing citizens and companies all across our continent who are on the one hand saying that we need more climate action are worried about what it does to their livelihoods and their industries. And that is why I said it is so important to make sure we stand more firmly on those two legs. Continue with climate action, absolutely, and making sure we do more in terms of the level playing field, the competitiveness, and the just transition. And that should be part of the design the next Commission is going to develop. Let me also articulate where I think, what I think is happening now. Particularly those companies which are for example, heavy industries or others that are very dependent on energy, they do have a point, unfortunately, that if you compare them to the US and you see how much they need to pay for energy, that is out of balance with the Americans. By the way, only a very small proportion of that is being caused by climate legislation. So let's not do it to ourselves that is because of climate. But it is true that if you compare an American company with its European peer, the Americans simply have a huge advantage because they pump stuff still out of the ground, and we are, for example, dependent on LNG, which is simply much more expensive. So that is something we need to solve because we are doing our citizens and our companies a huge disservice if we have them crumble and then still need to import the stuff that they're making. It would be something that we should absolutely prevent. Then on the IRA, I think the good thing about the IRA is that it's we have long as Europeans asked the Americans to become serious about setting the parameters in such a way that their businesses would embark on the green transition. And well, they might have done it in a slightly less orthodox way than many of us envisioned, but still, in essence, I think it is. I can fully understand why the Americans did it the way they are currently doing it. And by the way, it is up to them to decide in any case, like it is up to us to decide what type of instruments we want to embark on here in the European Union. What I'm not intimidated by is the number. By the way, this number of a couple of $100 billion US will probably be given out twice, thrice, or even more times because there seem to be a lot of appetite. Even though until today, it is all still in the making. But it already has significant anticipation effects. But if you then compare that to what the European Union is spending through the Innovation Fund, through the RRF, through all the parts in the MFF that are linked, and apologies for the jargon, but in the MFF that are linked to climate, you see that easily adds up to a figure that is much higher than a doubling or a tripling of the IRA money. Having said that, I'm pretty sure that part of the conversation going forward, and again, I'm not going to prejudge it, but part of the conversation going forward will be, do we need additional instruments? Do we need to have more of the same instruments? What is needed to make sure that we can solidify the competitiveness of our companies? What is needed to solidify the innovation we so direly need going forward? Then, ma'am, on Aurélie, I think it was on heating and cooling. Here again, it's I don't think it is helpful to preclude or prejudge any sector, and I fully understand what you were saying, because indeed some sectors have gotten more attention in the piece that came about so far. I think what is as a mindset tremendously important, and I know particularly residual heating a bit from the time I was still in business. It has had huge advantage, and I'm pretty sure it might well have them going forward. Is to be non-dogmatic in our approach and truly look at what is going to work. Friends, we're simply in a situation where we do not have the luxury to, for ideological reasons, get certain stuff out of the solution space. That is also what I'm always saying when people embark on the debates about nuclear. It's for some countries it is highly sensitive. Others, from the left to the right, swear by it and make a lot of use of it. And I think it is for all the right reasons that the European Union has included this in the solution space, made it part of the taxonomy, and then again leaves it up to member states to decide whether they go all out, they do it to a limited extent, or they feel that there is no buy-in in their specific societies. But it's part of the solution space.
Thank you. I would now take a few questions from the online audience. There are quite a lot of registrations and comments, so I presume a lot of people are listening there. The first question is by Mr. Royal van der Veen, who was essentially asking whether, kind of taking 90% for on aggregate, would you think that some member states will have to go beyond this 90% by 2040? A second question that I would kind of take out of the long list of questions is, your impact assessment is based on the assumption that we essentially reach the 2030 targets, and then 2040 is a somewhat extrapolation of that. But kind of, do you think we are on good track for the 2030 targets, or are we actually needing a lot more policy here to get there? And then the last one, again on the agriculture side. So if we let agriculture somewhat off the hook, would that mean that other sectors have to do significantly more?
So on all three, what the Commission is typically doing, and I think that is actually smart policy, and it has been smart policy in the past, is to, on the one hand, be clear that the goals are there for all member states. That is simply part of the package of being a member state, and yet take into account the different starting points, the different makeup of the industries in the various countries. So there is no member state that can be off the hook for 2030 or for 2050, and yet at the same time, and I was referring to nuclear, but there also, if you look at heavy industry, there are differences between member states that, of course, you need to be sensitive to. It's the beauty of Europe. Is to a large extent also in its diversity and the richness we bring to the table with all the 27 member states combined. So that will be my answer. But again, I mean, it's this also is, we can philosophize about it, but it is up to the next Commission. Am I confident about 2030? Yes. Having said that, there is still work on the table. And we all need to make sure we continue the pace. That's why I'm going to visit a range of member states, and I've been talking to the various ministers already about their NDCs to make sure that we do live up to it. But if we continue to diligently execute what we have agreed on, and we move forward, I'm actually convinced we can and will outperform the 2030 number. Then again, on different sectors, there's no alternative for making sure that we all contribute, regardless of what place we have in our society, what sector we're in. So I will continue to say that this is something we truly and can only solve together.
I think we have time for 2 more questions from the audience here. I think there's one question there and another one there.
Thank you. My name is Sara Koho. I'm a journalist, a correspondent for a Finnish newspaper, and I wanted to ask you about the role of carbon capture. You said that you don't want to pick out instruments, technologies, but in the Commission's proposal, carbon capture was mentioned, and it caused some criticism because some people say that it's not scientifically solidly proven, it's still experimental, and it's quite expensive. So why did the Commission want to point out carbon capture, and how do you see its role in the future?
Hi, maybe I stand up so you at least see us. Linda Kaltia, I lead the think tank Strategic Perspectives. First of all, also from our side, congratulations to the Commission on the publication. I think it was a good move in difficult times. Given you argued a lot about the energy security and industrial competitiveness, what would you think would be a good moment for member states to adopt the target? Also with a view that obviously the 2035 NDC needs to be submitted between November this year and February next year at the international level. And maybe a related question, can you tell us a bit more about sort of the just transition element on the fossil fuel phase out? When we discussed it with some unions, they were quite concerned that obviously the ETS doesn't actually predict a phase out date for coal or for gas. And obviously the unions might want to have a bit more clarity than any day between now and 2039. Thank you.
Let me start by your question on carbon capture, and I'll make a distinction between using nature, using the soil as part of the solution, and the specific a discussion on carbon capture, because I think the first part is not sensitive, is not part of the debate. The second part, and you're absolutely right, is, and whatever I say is always. Has struck me is always followed very closely from the political domain, because some people are very much in favor of it, others are dead against it, and I always give them the same answer. I'll tell them that there is no alternative for driving down emissions, and that we cannot and we will not CCS ourselves out of the problem. It simply doesn't exist. So for the vast part of the equation, it is, driving down emissions, full stop. Having said that, and fully in line with that first part, we also have to acknowledge, and that is where the difficulty comes in for those who might not like carbon capture, that we will live with hard to abate sectors for the foreseeable future, and that the best solution here is carbon capture, and that. Even though for the fast part of the equation, driving down emissions is what we need to do, we also need, again, because we cannot afford to leave any part of the solution space out of the equation, we also need carbon capture. So we will continue with that, and we will make sure we become more effective in it. And I'm not doing this to politically balance it out. I do think it is fair in both the domains. But you're absolutely right. Some like the first part of the answer but don't like the second. Others are in the exact opposite position. That's life. At least life for a politician is my experience. Then on 2035 and 2040, and a date for phasing out fossil, I think that is something we need to leave for another time. I don't think I can give you a lot of forward guidance. My best guess is, but again, we're talking about the here and the now and about this mandate, and many of the questions, ma'am, you were asking are actually about the next mandate, but my best guess would be the following. The current phase is about having a conversation with the 27 member states on their NDCs. And the current state of affairs is that many all have handed in their plans. Some are full marks or are close to the target. Some fall a bit short and have a bit of a gap. But typically these countries have also expressed their desire to further beef them up. And the process of the next couple of months is meant to have an in-depth conversation between not only the politicians but also the staff to make sure that all the member states arrive at the right level. So that is the first bit. Does it already help towards 2040? Absolutely, but it is not linked to it, if you will. Then the second phase is, what the next Commission will do. And of course, I would hope that they would embrace the communication and the narrative of this Commission, which is about the 90% and is just as much about the elements, the prerequisites that need to go hand in hand with it. And once the Commission has decided on that, that will enter the regular process, and eventually will end up in a trilogue. That is my best guess on how this will continue. Wow, it's hot in here, isn't it? Or is it just this part of the room?
I was told that. Now it works again. I was told that you had to leave by your colleagues, so therefore I tried to.
Yeah, they're the boss.
To wrap it up.
I decide on my agenda. So
I'm German. If I'm told that something has to end, then it has to end here. And I think 50 minutes are clearly not enough for this very wide discussion, for diving into this impact assessment and kind of understanding all the implications, distributional, between member states, between sectors, over time, between generations, between branches of society, that we probably have to discuss that for way longer. I think it's very important that you and the Commission kicks off this debate now with this strong document. Now, the good thing for the think tank community and the Brussels community is that this discussion is going to go on. It's going to get increasingly granular over time. That's what I understand from you. So we will have to discuss sectoral sharings. We will have to discuss sharing between member states. We have to discuss instruments. So this is in my understanding, the beginning of a process because. Again, if I understand correctly, the 2040 targets are going to be very ambitious, which means we need to change some of the architecture that we have in place, and therefore I'm very grateful to have you had present here to discuss that with us, and thanks also to the audience for the active participation. I'm very sorry for all those questions that have not been answered, but. We at Bruegel promise to continue to work on those subjects, invite you, and hopefully continue to have these debates for this and the next Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you.